Welcome back to Middle East in Depth, where we look at the biggest stories in the Middle East. An article by Turkish journalist Amberin Zaman in Al Monitor says Turkish opposition leader says Erdogan wants war with Syria. Kemal Kilicdaroglu, leader of Turkey's secular main opposition Republican People's Party known as the CHP, said in an Al Monitor interview, the world's most immoral man is currently occupying the Turkish Prime Minister's seat. He wants to drag Turkey into a war against Syria. The article says it was among the latest in a slew of leaked recordings linking his Prime Minister, his family and political allies to massive corruption charges. In the run-up to nationwide local elections, opinion polls continue to show Erdogan's Justice and Development Party, the AKP, comfortably in the lead, though the gap is narrowing in the two biggest cities of Ankara and Istanbul. CHP leader Kilicdaroglu has been criticised by a small but vocal group of militant Kemalists within the CHP who resent his efforts to break their age-old grip and to reform the party by, among other things, wooing Kurds and liberals. Regarding the economic situation in Turkey, the opposition leader said it needs to be understood that so long as Erdogan is in power, there can be no economic stability. So long as he threatens the business community, so long as there is no rule of law, and so long as the central bank is not independent, there can be no economic stability. In the past 2 months alone, the Turkish lira lost 20% of its value. Regarding the Syrian plane shot down in Turkish airspace a few days ago, he said the Syrian plane was a reconnaissance plane that was seeking al-Qaeda targets. By shooting it down, they helped al-Qaeda. And public outrage has followed the social media ban in Turkey. A Guardian article says, according to Turkish media reports, the decision to block YouTube was taken by Turkey's telecommunications authority, TIB, as a precautionary administrative measure. The Guardian says in February, Turkey passed a much criticised new internet law that allows the telecommunications regulator to block websites without a court order. Turkey previously banned YouTube in 2007, but lifted the ban 3 years later. The ban came after an anonymous YouTube account posted a leaked audio recording allegedly a confidential conversation between Turkish intelligence chief Hakan Fidan and other ministers discussing possible military action in Syria. The Guardian says Erdogan accused the Islamic cleric Fethullah Gulen, who lives in exile in Pennsylvania, of being behind the leaks. Erdogan has also criticised Twitter, saying it was threatening national security and that it had refused to cooperate with the Turkish authorities. Now to discuss, we're joined by Dr. Simon Waldman, Professor of Middle East and Mediterranean Studies at King's College London. Thank you for joining us again, Dr. Waldman.
Thank you very much for having me again.
My first question, I want to get your views on the comments of opposition leader Kilicdaroglu that Erdogan wants war with Syria. We've seen some tension recently. The tomb of Suleiman Shah, which lies inside Syrian territory, is currently guarded by Turkish troops, and the recent shooting down of the Syrian jet in Turkey has also caused friction. Could this escalate into Turkish involvement in Syria?
Yes, well, the danger is that it could escalate into something much bigger than what it is at the moment. And that's something that Kilicdaroglu is really playing on because, you know, the possibility that Turkey could be involved and embroiled in the Syrian crisis is something which is very unpopular among the Turkish electorate. So it's certainly something that he's playing on. Does Erdogan actually want war with Syria? I doubt that. But what he does want to do is look strong against these threats emanating from Syria, both the flying over of jets over Turkish airspace and, as you mentioned, the threat of the Suleiman Shah tomb.
So you think the opposition is using this as a way to get at Erdogan?
I do think so, because in many respects, Erdogan had to look strong because if he took the threat to the Suleiman Shah tomb idly and didn't respond, then that would make him look weak, and that's not something that he wants to do ahead of elections.
Yeah, and he was also described by Kilicdaroglu as playing good cop, bad cop with al-Qaeda. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I don't agree that he's playing good cop, bad cop with Al-Qaeda. I think really what's going on is Turkish foreign policy has been really shocked by the situation in Syria. They didn't expect it to last as long as it has. And in many respects, the foreign policy elite in Turkey don't know exactly what's going on in Syria. And, what the policy has been to be really quite aggressive and then to fall back on the NATO line. And now you've got these threats coming from Syria. And again, you're seeing more bellicose attitudes by the Turkish ruling elite. And then what I suspect would actually happen is that they'll soon fall back into the NATO line.
And do you think the general populace in Turkey see the conflict in Syria as a real threat to their security?
They do see it as a threat. It is not the same threat as Jordan is facing, or Lebanon with the influx of refugees and things of that nature. However, having said that, it is still a significant threat to Turkey. Don't forget, it was not long ago that there was a bombing in the eastern part of Turkey. 34 people were killed. This was very much seen to be related to the Syria crisis, and it was related to the Syria crisis. So it is a threat. But the Turkish population saw this security threat not because of the events in Syria itself, but the way in which the government had handled the crisis and their very aggressive stance against the Assad regime.
Yeah. And regarding internal politics in Turkey, the tapes leaked on YouTube that were then removed, and the banning of social media in Turkey. What does this have to do with what's going on in Syria? Is there any connection at all?
There is, with the latest leak tape, and the reason why YouTube has been banned. This was a meeting among the foreign minister, the intelligence chief, and a deputy of the chief of staff of the Turkish military, and they were discussing what their policy should be in Syria. And what was really one of the aspects which was shocking about this alleged tape, the authenticity probably did come from the foreign ministry. Whether it's doctored or not, that's something that's open to question, was perhaps a force flagging operation whereby Turkish forces would actually attack the Suleiman Shah tomb to allow for a pretext for a Turkish attack. And that's something which is incredibly explosive, and of course that needed to be taken down. But what happened instead was what I think is disproportional use of monitoring and internet force on the part of the Turkish government. Instead of just taking that particular leak down or that particular upload down on YouTube, the whole of the YouTube website was banned.
And as I understand it, this isn't the first time this has happened. Before, in 2007, Twitter was banned as well.
That's great. YouTube was banned in 2007. And what's interesting about it, for a good 2 or 3 years, Turks were unable to access Twitter unless they had some kind of proxy server or using a VPN access, to the point where it was almost ridiculous when Erdogan himself and Abdullah Gül were even saying themselves that this ban was no longer feasible, and there were even some references where they encouraged their own population to actually bypass the ban and use VPNs.
Is this the ban on social media? Is this seen as a real crackdown on democracy by the people, and will it push people closer to the CHP into voting for the opposition?
Well, I think so. Is this a ban on freedom of expression? Yes, it is, and for many reasons, it alienates different parts of the Turkish population. Many Turks are going onto Twitter, and one of the reasons why it's so popular is because the traditional media is seen to be engaged in self-censorship, and also there's government involvement in the media for various different reasons, and it's not seen to be an independent, free, fair media. And what people would do would go onto Twitter, and they would post news reports themselves or links to live stream or to YouTube as an alternative source of news. And of course this has been an attempt to block it. Of course the attempt has failed, and also it's a way of attempting to stifle freedom of speech in a society which is increasingly being internet savvy, having access to internet. And this is something that Turks don't like. They don't like interference in their freedom of speech, in their private life. And I think this may cost the AKP some votes. How many votes? We'll find out very soon.
Is there any free press currently in Turkey at all?
There is some free press, but there's significant difficulties in reporting from Turkey. So the problem is this: many of media outlets are owned by larger conglomerates, and in order to gain contracts in our other spheres outside of the media, they don't want to be on the bad side of the ruling government. Otherwise, they will lose the contract, or they will lose the tenure. So then they therefore engage in a form of self-censorship. And also there's been cases where Erdogan, in some cases Abdullah Gül, have called up editors of newspapers calling for particular journalists to be fired. Now, there are some outlets out there which are still reporting the news critically, but the problem is that the number is dwindling significantly. And there's a certain cost that a journalist would have to pay if they want to be free in what they report. And the consequences of reporting openly and critically are sometimes the very livelihood of the journalists themselves.
Yeah, and regarding the opposition, the CHP, it was described in our monitor as having a small but vocal group of militant Kemalists. How dominant is this old guard, and what do they represent, and what do they want for minority groups such as the Kurds in Turkey?
Well, yes, and this is an important point. Within the CHP, there is this kind of al-Qaeda, as you called it. This is, of course, the party of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the state and his particular modernization program, and it is a party which is traditionally quite nationalist.
Yeah.
And there's still many voters who vote for the CHP for those reasons. And this is an issue when it comes to the minority question, particularly the Kurdish question, not the Alevi question. Of course, Kilicdaroglus himself is an Alevi. But with the Kurdish issue, very much the peace process depends on the success of the AKP. And if the CHP were to come to power, not in these elections, but in future elections coming up, then the Kurdish process could be in question. That's a very important point, yes.
And does the CHP protect, because obviously it's a nationalistic party, but it was also the party of secularism. Do people in Turkey see Erdogan's party, the AKP, as threatening secularism?
There are a significant population who do think so, but it's not necessarily that about the question of Islam, or that the AKP are trying to put forward an Islamic agenda. I mean, there's been lots of polls about this, and something like only 25% of Muslim Turks in 2002 advocated Sharia to be implemented in Turkey. And just a couple of years ago, that's reduced to 8%. But what they do associate with the AKP, and particularly with Tayyip Erdogan, is an increasing majoritarian style of politics, which interferes in all aspects of life, whether that's, how many children a family should have, to construction projects in neighborhoods in Istanbul, and that's really what they're concerned about. And yes, coupled with that is a conservative outlook that wants to challenge the traditional Kemalist outlook of Turkish life and what it means to be a Turk. What does it mean to be a Turk? Does it mean secular Western looking, or is there a nominal Islamic identity involved there, looking back to the Ottoman past? So
and my final question, how has the economy fared under Erdogan, and do you think many people believe that the CHP will, if elected, will bring about an economic boost?
Well, the success of the AKP is very much associated with the economy. very much associated. And, had you asked me that question last year, I would have said, the AKP's performance with the economy is the reason why it's going to be a significant party for the next, generation. However, with the protests during the Gezi Park period and, the different leaked reports, questions of and allegations of corruption within the inner circle of Erdogan, and, of course, blogs on social media, the economy is now shaken. And this is a significant challenge to Erdogan's legacy. Now, nevertheless, having said that, despite allegations of corruption, despite the recent situation, there is still a question about how well the CHP can perform on the economy. And the AKP has proven its ability to actually govern well. And many Turks are wondering, and especially those who are not the traditional supporters of the CHP, they're wondering that is there really an alternative for the AKP? And, even though they may not support Erdogan, they might not support his particular policies, they're finding that they don't have much of a choice. And I'm sure a significant chunk of AKP voters that we'll see in upcoming elections, that's their mentality when they're casting their vote for the AKP.
We heard a lot about the corruption of Erdogan and the AKP. Could you just briefly explain what corruption has happened and is the CHP free of corruption? I mean, possibly not.
Well, the CHP haven't been ruling Turkey for the last 10 years or so. So in terms of corruption, well, not on a governmental scale. Now, previously to the rise of the AKP, Turkish politics, there were always cases of corruption, always significant cases of corruption. And that's one of the reasons why the AKP were successful. They don't call themselves the AKP, they call themselves the AK party. And the AK means white or clean, really running on a platform of anti-corruption. And that's what makes these corruption allegations that surfaced in the last few months so significant. And in terms of the types of corruption, I mean, just a few examples here, we're talking about embezzlement of money. In terms of receiving financial payments for bidders, for governmental contracts, and then they receive these contracts in return. We're talking about money laundering within certain members, allegedly, of the cabinet, and associated with kind of bypassing international trade embargoes on Iran. I mean, so this is significant corruption allegations to the extent which, were just surpass anything that previous to the AKP existed in Turkey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waldman. That's all we've got time for today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. That was Dr. Waldman from King's College London discussing the political situation in Turkey and the potential for an intervention in Syria. And for more updates, please visit levant.tv. That's all for today. Bye for now.